Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, the legislative session has come to an end for this summer. We've got members of our ACSA governmental relations team on the show today to talk to you about the bills of importance, plus those that ACSA has co-sponsored.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgars Thoughts, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you back after taking last week off. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. I did see, Edgar, if I'm correct, Jason Angle was our first person in the chat today, along with Lord Dutch. So thanks to all of you who are with us. Edgar, how are you?
Good. Happy to be here. I'm always impressed when people join in, especially I think this is considered now like the dog days of summer, deep here into the summer. I know, and here's the thing. I know it's the reality that we all live in, right? Where like summer just feels shorter now. Our schools start so early, and right, it's like, really, we're already talking about transitioning. But I know, hey, there's some of our folks, some of our members already back to school. Some of them are already in July, and I know the vast majority now here as we enter August, not too far away. So hopefully everybody enjoys the rest of the days of summer to whatever extent that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Edgar and I were at the ACSA board retreat last week. We'll hopefully be able to talk about that in just a couple of moments.
You're going to talk about your performance in cornhole, right?
Listen, it's not like
lack thereof.
It's not like you did that much better. I mean, come on. Folks, again, we've reached the end of the legislative session inside the state capitol. We've got two members of our ACSA governmental relations team on the show today to tell you all about what you need to know, what was accomplished during the legislative session, and the latest updates on the ACSA co-sponsored bills. We'll hit that in just a couple of moments. Edgar, a couple of news headlines of great importance for funding and for programs that benefit many more marginalized students here in the state. Let's start with the federal grant money. The federal grant money that our government put a freeze on so they could conduct an internal audit. Of course, you were speaking along with all of the Ed Coalition about this. A portion of that money has been released to the states for several title programs, but not the complete amount. The Trump administration has released about $1.3 billion of the $5 to $6 billion that has been withheld. California is expected to receive about $158 million of that money. A reminder that the total grant fund money has already been approved by Congress and signed by President Trump. A bipartisan group that includes 10 Republican senators is pushing the administration to restore the funds, but no announcement has been made on when or if states will be made whole and get the money that was supposed to be allocated. And then we have this story. It's something we've discussed here on previous shows. The Trump administration restricting undocumented immigrants for accessing public benefit programs like Head Start, shelters for domestic violence victims, at-risk youth facilities, substance abuse, adult education, mental health programs. On Monday, the state filed a lawsuit joining 20 other states in filing a lawsuit against the administration. In a news release from the state attorney general, Rob Bonta's office, the decision is contrary to law and a reversal of nearly 3 decades of federal practices. In the lawsuit, the attorneys general are asking for the court to enjoin the Trump administration from implementing the change. They argue that these new policies threaten the outright collapse of states' social safety nets. And Bonta did point to one in particular. He did call out the Head Start program, which serves more than 80,000 children in 2023-24. Edgar, your thoughts, the funding freeze, obviously you were there with Tony Thurman and our Ed Coalition to talk about the impact on California. But then, of course, we do have the other story that we talked about, the restricting undocumented immigrants from accessing public benefit programs. I just want to get kind of your thoughts on both of those, as we are still very much in that flux period where we just don't know what the federal government is going to do and the impact it has on our kids.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I guess in these days we count our blessings where we can. I guess some progress, right, that they did allow some of that funding now. While with that said, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty on what's to come and what's the future for some of those rest of the funds. Not to mention, the long-term prospect on some of these. Some credit deserved to our partners there at the California Department of Education, Tony Thurman's team, namely the chief deputy there, Dave Shapira, who's been keeping all of us in the education community pretty tied in terms of what's happening. I know they've been very focused on going back and forth with the federal government, trying to get answers, because there is uncertainty here in terms of how this is going to impact the team. So we do appreciate those efforts, something that us as an organization obviously have been very focused on. On the other issue, Naj, I mean, of this act to try to restrict funding for services for kids who might not be documented, for families. I think, like the AG said, like Mr. Bonta talked about, I mean, it just fundamentally gets at what the spirit of not only our democracy, but I think especially schools. You think about schools here or any of the other entities that provide these social services, that's one of the things that does create these institutions as safe spaces, namely schools, our Head Start program, that it doesn't matter, that whoever steps on our doorsteps, whoever comes to our schools, whoever comes to our programs, it's the one place that they know that regardless of their circumstance, they're going to be taken care of, right? And it doesn't matter about documentation. That's the one place where we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to provide you services. We're going to provide you support. And I think this effort to try to restrict that, it fundamentally gets at the trust that folks have now on institutions. And so I'm glad that California is pushing back on this. We've fought some of these fights here in California. Prop 187, similarly trying to get at what is the role of some of these public institutions, whether it be in immigration enforcement or on trying to restrict the access to these public benefit programs. And I think our state has had a consistent record, and so has the federal government, regardless of party preference, regardless of who's been in office. So I think this administration just fundamentally trying to change that. I don't think it's something that is consistent with the public good, and how that California is kind of trying to lead the charge on going against that. Puts our members and our folks in horrible situations too, in terms of having to be enforcers for these type of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that the states are banding together in this sense, but it's still, I mean, I'm only thinking about the impact on the kids, right? Especially our marginalized students or Black and brown students, those from low-income communities, those who, have had some issues with domestic violence in their families and everything. So certainly impactful. Let's go ahead and let's switch gears. Edgar, the legislative session just came to an end in Sacramento. It ended last week. And of course, that means we have a bunch of stuff to talk about.
Well, you're going to offend our folks because they're taking a break, but they're ramping up for the sprint here as they get back from the summer break. So for now, and you're going to give PTSD there to Surratt and Cordell here. But I think, well, it's been a real busy time there in the legislature. And I know there's some important issues that we're going to see how they go here toward as the sprint to the end, as we talked about in the final push.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and bring in our guests today, Surratt Kaminsky and Cordell Hampton, ACSA Legislative Advocates. Surratt and Cordell, great to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Cordell, let me go to you first. Give us some feedback on the legislative landscape. It's summer recess. many of the members of the legislature back in their communities, working with their stakeholders, talking with their voters. But there's still work to be done in Sacramento. Can you tell us about what we should expect during this period of time?
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to be on. So usually when we think about summer recess, we're thinking you're somewhere on the coast or on the beach, maybe reading a good book. I know if I'm on the beach, I'm going to be swimming in the ocean. Now, some people say I'm not a great swimmer, aka my friends. They might be true about that. Do I sink like a stone in the water? Absolutely. Does that stop me? Absolutely not. So, but we're here in the Central Valley, right? We're here in Sacramento, so there's no coast, so we don't have to worry about that. But for legislative staff and members, they're preparing for, as Edgar was saying, this final sprint. The summer recess the legislature reconvenes at August 18th. The next big deadline is August 29th, when both the Senate and the Assembly committees will have their second suspense hearing. Mm-hmm. And then the legislature's last day to meet is September 12th. So in this about last month or so, things are going to move very quickly. Mm-hmm. So during this time, legislative offices are working to address unresolved concerns with stakeholders, even with some state departments, with the goal of getting the legislation to the best possible shape before Appropriations Committee. Likewise, on our end, we're continuing to engage offices. Again, everyone's still here, everyone's still working. So during this period, we're working with offices to make sure that bills align with our One Voice advocacy platform. So the work is still very much alive in Sacramento, and we're still pushing to meet the deadline during this last month or so, during this final sprint.
Naj, two thoughts as Cordell's talking here. First, we need pictures next time of Cordell and his floaties.
Yeah.
In the ocean.
Yeah. I mean, this one.
Life-size floaties. I already see it. And you know how this works, Cordell. You don't offer the pictures. Michael, I could already, but we're going to have an image here one way or the other, right?
Seriously, Cordell, that came out so far out of left field. I did not expect that.
I want to keep you guys on your toes.
As I'm listening, going, what on earth is Cordell talking about at this moment?
And then the second controversial thing he said, and I always catch, and I got myself into trouble last time. I think it was Yvonne. Made some reference to Southern California and Santa Barbara, and I had to ask that question. Now, Cordell said Sacramento and the Central Valley. I know I'm not a native Sacramento person, so I'll let you all argue whether are you folks that are from Sacramento, Central Valley, Northern California. Anyway, a topic for another show here. Surratt transition. Thank you for bearing with all that, Surratt.
I got her to laugh. That's a plus.
We here at ACSA have 3 co-sponsored bills this year. And just to remind folks what we mean by co-sponsor, these are bills that now our members have asked us to go find legislation, go find a member of the legislature to author this legislation on our behalf. So it has the ACSA name on there. Assembly Bill 1224, Assembly Bill 606, and AB 959. What can you tell us about all these bills that were put forth by ACSA?
So all 3 of these bills address the educator shortage in some type of way. I'll start with the last 2 that you mentioned, Assembly Bill 606, and that's with Assembly Member Quirk Silva. That one is all about getting better reciprocity for out-of-state pupil personnel services holders. And so that's our school counselors, our social workers, and our psychologists. All 3 of our co-sponsored bills have widespread engagement, multiple co-sponsors. On this bill, we're co-sponsoring with the California Association of School Counselors, California Association of School Psychologists, and the California County Superintendents. What we're trying to do is when someone comes from out of state and maybe they're deficient to California standards in some sort of manner with a prior experience, we're trying to allow for a better mechanism for them to begin working in California schools with a supervisory element and a way for LEAs to assist with university connections to acquire any of those missing units. So that's what we're working on there. That bill is in its last fiscal committee on the Senate side, and we're working through getting it through. Assembly Bill 959 by Assemblymember Hadwick. We're co-sponsoring that with Placer County Office of Ed and California County SUPS. And that would allow CTC-approved districts and county offices the ability to offer an administrative intern credential pathway. Currently, only universities can offer that. That's also in the last fiscal committee on the Senate side, working through getting that passed. And the final bill is the one that's, I would say, most controversial of the 3. and that's AB 1224 by Assemblymember Valencia, and that is to bring back that 60-day substitute flexibility to help provide better continuity for classrooms when a teacher goes out on leave or sometimes in the instance of vacancies. So that one is also co-sponsored with California County SUPS, CSBA, or School Boards Association, CASBO, the school business officers. We're working in lockstep on that. We do have resistance from public advocates and CTA. They believe employers already have a multitude of options to provide continuity to students. Our administrators know that there are issues with some of those options. For example, we've got the teaching permit for statutory leave that always should be sought with subject matter expertise. But when we have vacancies, those teachers or a substitute who could have been in the instance of leave is serving in the vacancy. So there isn't really a pool of those permits to serve. So we're working through it. The bill has enjoyed unanimous bipartisan agreement on the policy. Legislators are agreeing with us that if we get to the end of the road and we exhaust all the options on making sure we're following the hiring hierarchy, that we're looking for subject matter competencies, that at least we err on the side of continuity for the students. So lastly, it'll be heard in the Senate Fiscal Committee next month. And so we're working on that in the back end, fast and furious.
Sorry, thank you for that update. And here in a second, I'll ask you to repeat the bill numbers, because I know we had people are noting your bills and wanting to come out. But before you go there, just ask you, why do you think there's such a disconnect, right? Like we can't, and this is going for years, it's on 1224 on the substitute flexibility. I think across the state, this has just been a consistent theme in terms of the shortages and the impact that it has for students. I'm glad to hear that that we're getting traction there within the official votes in the legislature, but there still seems to be this organizational resistance. I mean, what do you make of that, given that this is an issue that's been so persistent?
Yeah, Edgar, I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier today. There's always a rub between, the best, most highly qualified scenario and what is practical in terms of implementation. There's always going to be that rub. We always want what's best, but it has to also be actionable and attainable. And so I think that that's what we run into sometimes when we're working with state agencies. And the theory of it sounds great, but that's what makes it so critical to hear from our members, because they're the implementers. They can tell you immediately, okay, well, you've got these waivers, that's great, but if there is, God forbid, a car accident and we've got a teacher, a math teacher that is out for now 2 months, what are we going to do? We don't have someone who can automatically sub in for higher level math. What are we going to do? We need to obviously go through all the steps to try to find a subject matter expert. But if it is a school that already had a vacancy and whoever had that subject matter expertise is already serving in that classroom, what do you do for the second scenario? And so again, getting a policy where we put those checks and balances in there, but then we also, at the end of the day, have some mechanism to give continuity.
Okay, real quick, 1224, which one is 1224?
That's a 60-day sub.
AB 606?
Better out-of-state reciprocity.
And Assembly Bill 959.
That's the admin intern credential route.
Thank you.
Pop quiz.
I know, seriously.
It's
a good thing, Edgar, you didn't just whip out the Ed Code book and start putting numbers out there.
It's quick on her feet. I knew she.
It's okay because I was a swimmer in high school, so I don't need my floaties.
Oh, there we go.
Don't brag.
Folks, if you have questions for Saret or Cordell, go ahead and put those into the chat. Cordell, tell us about Assembly Bill 218, the efforts of 218, what's taken place over the last few months, and what should our members know?
Yeah, so what you're hearing from me and Saret already, right, is just the legislature is on recess, but the work still continues. So in addition to direct advocacy on legislative efforts to address impact of 218 employer liability for childhood sexual assault claims, ACSA has been featured in news articles as well as providing background information on topics to media outlets. There's a lot of misconception in the public and even in the legislature about insurance coverage to provide survivors with recognition and financial compensation. There are no private insurance company dollars, but Prop 98 dollars intended for today's classrooms and teachers. So even schools without claims are still paying higher coverage premiums and a special assessment to their risk pools. These news stories are another tool to help bolster our position in the legislature as we seek to find better balance than the current system, so we can still honor survivors without draining funding for students today. So far, we've been featured in two news articles, one of them being the SF Chronicle that examines how districts, even without a claim, can still experience the effects of having to pay steep insurance assessments. And the other article looks at the total estimated settlement and the impact that those settlements can have on districts, especially smaller school districts. I want to give a shout out to Dorothy Johnson, who has taken the lead on this. She's been extremely thoughtful in balancing how to honor victims while ensuring that districts remain solvent. With that said, there are two bills that we're currently tracking. There's SB 577 by Senator Laird. This addresses paying down settlements and awards after the fact. ACSA has an opposed unless amended position on this bill. We want to make sure to include solutions that help limit massive awards rather than just provide tools to pay them down. And then we also have SB 848 by Senator Perez. This creates a dozen steps for prevention of childhood sexual assault in school settings. ACSA has a support position on this bill and working to address some technical amendments to promote smooth implementation. And just as a reminder, although our sponsored legislation, AB 1233, was held in Assembly Appropriations Committee, which would have established a non-certified school employee database, the provisions of that bill are moving forward in SB 848, which is why we have that support position. So although it's not the original bill that we had initially sponsored, a lot of our priorities are still being carried forward. So just want to make sure that's still out there.
Saret, another issue I know we've talked a lot about here this year is charter school legislation, namely Assembly Bill 84 and Senate Bill 414. I know there's been a lot of public comment on the hearing, whenever it was last week, a couple weeks ago, like the hearing rooms were full, a lot of back and forth on that. What can you tell us about the bills and kind of where do they stand?
Yes, Edgar, that was last week. I refer to it as Charterpalooza. My pro tip is to bring a collapsible cooler in your bag with your packed lunch and your snacks. But joking aside, there are two very highly consequential charter bills that made it out of policy committees last Wednesday, both authored by prominent legislators that seek to codify recommendations from the LAO FIGMAT reports that are seeking to combat waste, fraud, and abuse of public funds. So you said it, AB 84, Assemblymember Mersucci, he's chair of the Assembly Education Committee, and Senate Bill 414, authored by Senator Ashby, who is Senate Assistant Majority Leader. So again, both prominent members of the legislature. Both of these bills seek a number of changes regarding to audit and accounting standards, funding determinations for non-classroom-based charter schools, school contractors and educational enrichment activities, and authorizing. Both authors have been very accessible and responsive to ACSA and our membership. We did recently have to escalate our position to a concerns position on both bills, and we joined partners like CASBO, the School Business Officials, California County Superintendents, the Small Schools Districts Association, and a couple of the large district and county authorizers. You know this, Edgar, in your prior work on charter schools, ACSA has always had to strike a nuanced stance on this highly politicized topic. And our membership is comprised of administrators who work in charter schools and administrators who are also authorizers. So, you know, these bills are very complicated. There are a lot of implications, but the fact remains that if authorizing duties are largely changed or restructured, there needs to be coherence to that system, and there needs to be funding for those added duties. So I am hopeful that authorizers can be represented at the negotiations as these bills continue to move forward. At the end of the day, we share those mutual goals of improving the state system of oversight of charter schools and ensure positive outcomes for students and appropriate use of taxpayer funds. You know, Cordell outlined what's happening right now in summer recess. There are extensive negotiations ongoing on both of these bills and trying to merge them to bring them to some sort of common piece that parties can agree on.
Sarah, let me ask you about the work that still needs to go on. Both you and Cordell have talked about it. Lawmakers are on recess right now, but they're already looking at the next session because there's some regulatory work that needs to be fixed over the summer, or we're going to be talking about some financial impact to students. What can you tell us about this time frame?
Yeah, the legislature is out, but advocacy work on the state agency side is always ongoing. We just had the Commission on Teacher Credentialing meeting last month. We're prepping for another meeting next month. Diana Vu on our team, she just covered the State Board of Education meeting 2 weeks ago. ACSA was advocating on a number of topics related to accountability. The point that you just touched on is an issue that we've been working through the summer with Department of Healthcare Services and CDE, California Department of Ed. And that is how to respond to the federal agency Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. They issued guidance that states that the current process for Medicaid reimbursement options, the programs that we use here in California, I'm going to do 2 acronyms, but I will tell you what they mean, LEA BOP and ESMA. They say that this violates FERPA. So LEA BOP is the LEA Billing Option Program and the School-Based Medi-Cal Administrative Activities Program. So I see we're almost at the bottom of the hour, or 1:30. So I won't get into the numerator and the denominator and how this is all calculated. I don't want to give you the math lesson, but it does have to do with the Medicaid eligibility ratio, or what's called MR. And basically, if California doesn't make a change to how the MR numerator is calculated before it finalizes our next state plan amendment in September of this year, so in a couple of months, it would only include Medicaid enrolled students whose parents have provided consent to determine the eligibility. And based on previous engagement with parents on the topic, we anticipate that that's only 20% of parents to sign the necessary consent to determine the eligibility. So that could lead to an 80% reduction, which we're anticipating is about $400 million annually. So we are working really closely with DHCS on this, talking to CDE. We have some state examples that we've been looking at. Colorado has a fix that we might be able to implement with a potential data sharing agreement where CDE would sign that agreement with DHCS. But, getting back to the story that you both led with, there's a lot of sensitivity on the topic, making sure that we get this right. There are a lot of attorneys involved on both state agency sides, making sure that, this piece, this advocacy is all a part of the larger policy conversation with how California is working with the federal government. And again, there's a lot of sensitivity to that, but we'll continue to be in the mix and keep our members apprised of the changes and potential for advocacy.
I think, Edgar, you and I could probably write a book on the number of new phrases we have heard on this show. Never have I heard MER numerator before. So, Sarette, thank you for adding another to our legislative lunch break dictionary.
That was a new one.
That was a new one. By the way, let me just, as somebody who's lived in Northern California for 30 years, Sacramento is Northern California. Don't give me any of that Central California nonsense.
The internet says differently.
Yeah, well, you can't believe everything on the internet, Cordell. You should know that. So just want to make sure everybody is aware. Sacramento is Northern California. Sarette and Cordell, thanks so much for being with us today. Sarette Kaminsky, Cordell Hampton, ACSA Legislative Advocates. Thanks again for being with us here today. Edgar, so much going on when it comes to what was happening in the Capitol, and still so much more as we head into the next legislative session. Your thoughts? You monitor this stuff as much as anybody. I was going to ask both Sarette and Cordell, scale of 1 to 5. 5, things are great with public education and what's being determined inside the state capitol. 1, it's a complete mess. You've been in this business for a long time. Where are you on this?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we always, all of us that follow the legislation, and our members are the first ones to understand this, right? Even folks that watch this show, whatnot, that half of the things that we're talking about on this show are not necessarily things that our folks are jumping up and down and saying, yes, state, fix this problem for me, right? Sometimes it's the unintended consequences. With that said, I was glad that SRED was able to note some of the pieces of legislation, namely the ACSA sponsored ones, that are a result of our members, of us hearing feedback about how can we try to at least mitigate some of the policy issues that we see out there that ultimately, hopefully, will help our members and their teams serve the students. So it's an interesting time, I think, given the federal landscape, but I think it's all the issues that Cordell and Surratt talked about is a reminder that it's at the state level where there's more of a direct impact, right, in terms of not only our funding, but some of those policy issues and those legislative issues. Those sometimes, most of the time, I would say, directly impact our schools even more so than what's happening in Washington, D.C. Hence why we put so much attention on Sacramento.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to like us on Facebook, to follow us on YouTube, to now watch us on LinkedIn. As far as YouTube, when you subscribe, you'll get an instant update when Edgar and I are going to come on the air with breaking news. And of course, if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and send your photos, your talking points, your news releases to Michelle Carl at mcarl@acsa.org. By the way, Rusty Gordon acknowledges Sacramento is in Northern California, and our good friend Mary Stark, Santa Barbara is in Central California.
What I'm hearing by all of these comments is that our government relations school needs to go to geography.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Our GR team needs to go to geography.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Folks, thanks so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook, ACSA YouTube, and ACSA LinkedIn. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.